Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a really kind of remarkable disc that was part of the Japanese Sony Ormandy edition. And this is going to be coming in the remainder of the Ormandy stereo Sony box, because these are recordings that were made in 1967. It looks like 63, 66, and 67. So some of this was in the earlier box, but it's really worth mentioning because what you get here is Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, Christ on the Mount of Olives, and then, believe it or not, Bruckner's Te Deum. And I love this disc, I have to say, because it's interesting for a bunch of reasons. First of all, you've got Ormandy and Philly, and they sound great. They always sound great. They play beautifully in this music. You've got some wonderful soloists. In the Missa Solemnis, it's Martina Arroyo, who didn't make enough records. I mean, she's glorious. Maureen Forrester, who's fabulous. Richard Lewis, and Cesare Siepe. I mean, what a great cast, right? In Christ on the Mount of Olives, you have Judith Raskin, who was a remarkable soprano, Richard Lewis, and Herbert Beatty, who is nobody that anybody remembers probably, but sorry if Herbert Beatty's relatives are out there, but he wasn't one of the big names, but he's perfectly respectable. And in the Bruckner Te Deum, you have Maria Stoddard. Yes, she's like a Bruckner lady, sort of, to the extent they exist. Helen Vinny, mezzo-soprano, Stanley Kolk, who was a very good oratorio-type tenor, and Donald Graham, who was a very good bass. The choirs, of course, are going to, maybe excite a little bit of ridicule because they're not the biggest professional choirs that we expect these days. Robert Shaw trained choirs that existed in those days and whatnot, or the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. But they're really better for that. They're enthusiastic. You've got the Temple University Chorus in the Te Deum and Christ on the Mount of Olives, and the Singing City Choral in the Missa Solemnis. Now, you can complain about the choruses, and I don't, because I sang in a chorus. And, for most of human history, the quality of choral singing in the universe was not as high as the quality of orchestral playing, because choirs were amateur organizations, even though they may have had semi-professional singers and whatnot, or they would have, added some ringers if they needed them for something really important. But that's what they were. Even, the Vienna Musikverein and the Singen Gesamt, whatever the hell they are, they're not so hot as often as not. Even in these works, you just deal with it. French choirs, oh my God, you listen to those original recordings of like Poulenc's Gloria and stuff like that, you just go, oy, 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 oy. And, it's okay. It was the style of the day. And we may decry it now with our hoity-toity, virtue of hindsight, ability to look back at the whole thing, but that's not fair. It's not right. We need to give these people credit for doing the best that they could do at the time. And if it's not as great as some of the, best of today's performance quality, well, then we can acknowledge that and move on, because there are a lot of wonderful musical qualities. One of the things that just blows my mind about this particular set is the Bruckner Te Deum. Somebody left a comment, Ormandy, he only recorded, Bruckner's fourth? Well, that's not true. He did a wonderful fifth, a wonderful seventh, and this is the most exciting Bruckner Te Deum you've ever heard in your life. He gets through the whole thing in 18 minutes. Carillon takes something like 25 or something. You can be much grander and bigger than Ormandy is. That is true. But wow, this is just one red-blooded, hot, exciting, youthful, passionate even performance of the Te Deum. And Ormandy is no mechanismus here. He doesn't just beat time. I mean, he has things, he inflects and does it, in a very, very effective way. It's amazing, actually, how exciting this thing is. I hadn't heard it in a long time, but recently I saw this sitting around in my collection and said, well, I haven't listened to this in a while. And I went, whoa, yeah, that Te Deum. It tells us, in addition to, the interest of the performances, the quality of the performances, that when record companies were largely local, this is what we heard. This is how we learned the works. I mean, if you were in Germany, obviously you had other versions, and some people might consider those to be more idiomatic or more effective because they were much more part of the repertoire than they were over here. But it was still a wonderful way to get to know this music. And I'm constantly impressed looking back on what was going on in the 50s and 60s and 70s at just how much interesting repertoire was getting recorded. We don't know about it now because it didn't stay in print. And one of the cool things about these big boxes that are coming is that it restores all of this stuff to the repertoire, and we can see the whole recording program, as a unity. And that really is important in considering the dissemination of these works and how people got to know them. So no, these are not the performances that you would have heard if you were growing up in good old Germany. They certainly are not. And I don't claim that Ormandy's Bruckner, for example, is better than Eugen Joachim's or Karajan's, or that the Missa Solemnis is better. Well, I mean, the best Missa Solemnis everyone knows is George Sell. So with the Cleveland Chorus trained by Robert Shaw, that's insane. But I mean, it's not Klemperer either, if you want to go that way and go back to Europe. I mean, we don't have to make these invidious comparisons. It's not a zero-sum game because this has all been recorded, and we can enjoy these various things for what they're worth as long as they're not dreadful. And boy, these are not dreadful. These are serious, talented musicians doing their best by music that they love and take very seriously and give it the attention and treatment that it deserves. But they are unconstrained by the usual traditions, particularly in the Bruckner. And when you think about it, that Ormandy did Bruckner 4, 5, 7 in the Te Deum, that's pretty good for an American conductor, an American orchestra. Nobody else was doing it when Ormandy was doing it, and so we American collectors had exposure to a pretty good sampling of Bruckner in performances that are faster and perhaps more clearly related to the other romantic things that were very popular in the day, Tchaikovsky and Brahms and whatnot, but no less affecting for that, and certainly no less well done of their type. The only question is whether or not these artists are going to get the respect they deserve coming from outside, the usual ghetto where such performances take place. And I think they deserve that respect. So this is a very interesting twofer, a Japanese Sony twofer of Ormandy doing Beethoven and Bruckner. And if you're curious about this sort of thing, then I recommend you give it a listen. It may surprise you. I mean, Christ on the Mount of Olives isn't going to surprise anybody. It's not Beethoven's most thrilling work, but this is not its worst performance either, not by a long shot. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.